Hi, it's Ray Grant. It is Saturday, December 9th, 2023. It is 10:29 p.m. here in Pittsburgh. I'm going to very quickly, since the next chapter of my book was on the letters, I am very quickly going to cover like some aspects of the letters that are covered in that chapter, and then I think most of what I talk about in that chapter I've already talked about in this video series, but maybe I'll reiterate some things. Um, let's go back to the just counting the these. Okay, I actually have them counted in the letters, so I'm just going to read what my count off is. This is chapter 12, Zodiac letters. Much like a prosecutor in a court of law, this book presents an argument. My intent is not so much to supply a comprehensive history of the case, but rather to provide a close reading of events that is consistent with the evidence. A lot of people who followed this case, and not just the Zodiac hobbyists, will say that the letters are what sets it apart from other serial murder cases. But because the letters from the Zodiac were written to create and perpetuate the very legend Zodiac buffs place their unblinking faith in, of a sad little man scrawling his nasty messages to society in the dim light of his kitchen for the thrill of seeing them in the newspaper, for me to quote from those letters at length here would defeat this book's purpose. Instead of doing that, this chapter looks at short excerpts from a handful of the letters, analyzing them from a conventional evidence standpoint. I will cover some of the cryptographic aspects of the messages in chapter 18. Okay, I'm going to just for the sake of clarity here and completeness, I'm going to tick off the what I consider to be the genuine Zodiac letters. And these are pretty much everything I say is backed up by Sherwood Morrill. The only difference is that I consider the whole card to be a Zodiac letter. I don't think he did. I think, believed the April 78 letter was a genuine Zodiac letter. I don't believe it was. So it's a one-for-one situation. Other than that, we agree across the board. The confession letter 1, Riverside Enterprise, November 29th, 1966. 2, the confession letter 2, Riverside Police Department, November 29th, 66. 3, loose leaf letter 1, Riverside Enterprise, April 30th, 1967. 4, loose leaf letter 2, Riverside Police Department, April 30th, 1967. 5, loose leaf letter 3, Joseph Bates, April 30th, 1967. 6, Z408 Segment 1, Vallejo Times Herald, July 31st, 1969. 7, Z408 Segment 2, San Francisco Examiner, July 31st, 1969. 8, Z408 Segment 3, San Francisco Chronicle, July 31st, 1969. 9, this is the Zodiac speaking, San Francisco Examiner, August 69. We don't know the exact date because we don't have access to the envelope, which was apparently trashed. Letter number 10, the school bus threat plus swatch of shirt. San Francisco Chronicle, October 13th, 1969. Letter 11, the pen card plus Z340 plus swatch of shirt. San Francisco Chronicle, November 8th, 1969. Letter 12, the bus bomb diagram, San Francisco Chronicle, November 9th, 1969. Letter number 13, Dear Melvin plus swatch of shirt, to Melvin Belli, December 20th, 1969. Letter 14, Z13 plus second bomb diagram, San Francisco Chronicle, April 20th, 1970. Letter number 15, the Dragon Card, to San Francisco Chronicle, April 28, 1970. Letter number 16, Z32 plus the Phillips 66 map section to the San Francisco Chronicle, June 26, 1970. Letter number 17, kidnapping confirmation of Kathleen Johns to San Francisco Chronicle, July 24th, 1970. Letter number 18, the Little List letter, also called the Mikado letter, plus the Radiant PS, to the San Francisco Chronicle, July 26, 1970. Letter number 19, the Hole card, to the San Francisco Chronicle, October 5th, 1970. Letter number 20, the Halloween card, to the San Francisco Chronicle, October 27th, 1970. Letter number 21, the LA Times letter to the Los Angeles Times, March 13th, 1971. Letter number 22, the Lake Tahoe card, plus hole punch, to San Francisco Chronicle, March 22nd, 1971. Letter number 23, the Exorcist letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, January 29th, 1974. Letter number 24, the SLA letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, February 14th, 1974. Letter number 25, the Badlands card to the San Francisco Chronicle, May 8th, 1974. Letter number 26, the Count Marco letter to the San Francisco Chronicle, July 9th, 1974. Since all the Zodiac letters are available in their full text online for the clicking, I will highlight only selected passages here and concentrate on just a handful of examples. Okay. The confession letter, November 29th, 1966. The confession letter was mailed to both the Riverside Enterprise newspaper and the Riverside Police Department. The letter was typed on non-standard teletype paper, and as I have pointed out, I've used Morse code redivision, Morse code converted to binary using 1 for dash and 0 for dot. So the first letter sent by the Zodiacs was sent on teletype paper. And both copies were carbons of the original and typed in an all caps format. In the letter, the writer describes pulling the middle wire from the distributor of Sherry Bates's car while she is in the RCC library. He then happens by and offers her a lift home in his own car. He walks her down a dark alley, attacks her with a knife, and cuts her throat. As I demonstrated in the Riverside chapter, the version of events presented in this letter is completely false. Sherry Bates was never in the RCC library that night, and she could not possibly have been murdered by just one person. Two details convinced police that the confession letter was written by her killer. Number one, he pulled the middle wire from the distributor, and number two, he made a phone call to the police. Since those are the only two details in the letter which might indicate first-hand knowledge of the crime, we have to assume those two things convinced Riverside PD that the letter came from her killer. It's been stated by some Zodiac buffs that the detail about the distributor wire was published in the newspaper. That's not true. The newspaper accounts mention the car having been disabled and do mention the distributor, but they don't specifically say that the middle wire of the distributor was pulled out. It would be unusual for someone writing a hoax letter to be that precise about a detail when he didn't absolutely know it to be true. None of the newspaper accounts mentions a call to the police from the killer in the wake of the murder. Since Riverside PD accepts the confession letter as authentic, we have to assume that the killer did in fact call the police at some point, and that the call itself was noticed by investigators and struck them as coming from the killer. Since the murders in Riverside and on Lake Herman Road were committed using the same tactical special ops approach, it seems a bit of a stretch to suggest the similarities of tone and handwriting in the corresponding letters were somehow coincidental, or that the Zodiacs, in acknowledging their Riverside activity in the letter of March 13, 1971, were taking credit for a murder they didn't commit. The killers waited a month to see if anyone would suspect the truth. Despite the library reconstruction and the numerous incongruities associated with the murder, neither the Riverside Police Department nor the local newspaper smelled a rat. The killers then chose to go ahead and send a letter which presented the version of the murder they wanted the public to believe. The letter is Victorian in its melodramatic tone. She was young and beautiful, but now she is battered and dead. She is not the first, and she will not be the last. I lay awake nights thinking about my next victim. Maybe she will be the beautiful blonde that babysits near the little store and walks down the dark alley each evening about 7. Or maybe she will be the shapely blue-eyed brunette that said no when I asked her for a date in high school. But maybe you will not be either. But I shall cut off her female parts and deposit them for the whole city to see. So don't make it too easy for me. Keep your sisters, daughters, and wives off the streets and alleys. How could a spurned teenage suitor have written that? Let's take. Okay, I'm going to skip this bit about the where the car was. The letter says, I plunged the knife into her and it broke. The deepest wound to her torso caused a rib laceration of less than half an inch, which is the only skeletal injury noted during the entire autopsy. There are no other bone lacerations and no fractures whatsoever. So how did the knife break? No blade fragment was found inside Sherry Bates, and none was found at the crime scene despite Riverside PD using a metal detector. Knife blades are made of metal. If you plunge a knife into someone violently enough to break the knife, it will go in deeper than half an inch. And if hitting a bone keeps it from doing that, it figures to fracture or at least splinter that bone. I suspect the detail of the knife breaking was added in an effort to explain away the absence of stab wounds. There have been descriptions of the Bates autopsy as listing 42 stab wounds. There were, in point of fact, no stab wounds whatsoever except to the throat. But if you count every nick and scratch on her face and fingers, and the handful of superficial cuts on her torso, it might add up to 42 wounds altogether. 7 deep slashes to the throat and 35 insignificant scratches to the face, fingers, and torso might be more like it. Z408 letters. On August 1st, 1969, 3 letters prepared by the killer were received at the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. The nearly identical letters took credit for the shootings at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs Park. Each letter also included 1/3 of a 408-symbol cryptogram, which the killer claimed contained his identity. The killer demanded they be printed on each paper's front page or he would cruise around all weekend, killing lone people in the night and then move on to kill again, until I end up with a dozen people over the weekend. The Chronicle published its third of the cryptogram on page 4 of the next day's edition. An article printed alongside the code quoted Vallejo Police Chief Jackie Stilts as saying, "We're not satisfied that the letter was written by the murderer," and requested the writer send a second letter with more facts to prove his identity. The threatened murders did not happen, and all 3 parts were eventually published. That is all from Wikipedia. The account from Wikipedia is factually wrong in one detail. What was published in the newspapers wasn't what was mailed by the Zodiacs. Yeah, I'm talking here about the Z408 cipher segments. I think I've already covered that that aspect of the. That's a picture of page 33 from the Vallejo PD police report for the Darlene Ferrin murder. It's basically a blank page. So. I think I've covered that in. I talk about the Z that was changed into a square. Part of the reason to send ciphers to 3 newspapers, it's let me go back here. Why create a statement within a cipher and then divide that cipher into three equal parts and send them to three different newspapers? This is something that the David Fincher movie Zodiac actually gets right. He has the editorial board of the San Francisco Chronicle arguing about the advisability of publishing the cipher. The Paul Avery character, played by Robert Downey Jr., verifies that the other two newspapers have the other two-thirds of the cipher. Now it becomes a matter of competing with those other two papers for the story. If you were going to send a message to the world through the newspapers, and you wanted to make absolutely sure that the newspapers would cooperate with your publicity stunt, what would be the best way of doing that? Fincher's editors don't spend much time worrying about the possibility that the killer will make good on his threats to kill people. Instead, they worry about being scooped by the other papers. That's the practical reason for sending the cipher in three parts. By doing it, the Zodiacs guaranteed that the cipher would make it out of the letter bins of the mailrooms and into the papers. Whatever the Zodiacs intended by whatever the Zodiacs intended by their special ops tactical raids, it's clear that their message was aimed not so much at the police or newspapers, but at the general public. Whatever they were creating it for the whole world. WW, by the way. Okay, this is the Zodiac speaking. Okay, this is the Zodiac speaking letter. In early August of 1969, the Zodiac sent the San Francisco Examiner a letter that began for the first time with a signature phrase, although it is not actually the Zodiac signature phrase. Dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking. He says the killers say that 11 times. They say, please rush to editor 14 times. So this is the Zodiac speaking is not actually his signature phrase. The comments on pages 2 to 3 of the letter are unique. I'm guessing that in the entire history of criminal investigation, it had never happened before that a perpetrator, prior to being caught and giving a confession in person to the police, had ever publicly corrected a police misconception about a crime. Last Christmas, in that episode, the police were wondering as to how I could shoot and hit my victims in the dark. They did not openly state this, but implied this by saying it was a well-lit night and I could see the silhouettes on the horizon. Bullshit. That area is surrounded by high hills and trees. What I did was tape a small pencil flashlight to the barrel of my gun. If you notice in the center of the beam of light, if you aim it at a wall or ceiling, you will see a black or dark spot in the center of the circle of light, approximately 3 to 6 inches across. When taped to a gun barrel, the bullet will strike exactly in the center of the black dot in the light. All I had to do was spray them as if it was a water hose. There was no need to use the gun sights. The comments here are a direct response to Les Lundblad's remarks as quoted in one of the Vallejo papers. Lundblad explained that the killer needed no artificial lighting for accuracy in shooting the girl, since she was running on a plateau and her body was silhouetted against the sky. This shows us that the Zodiacs were closely following what was being said about them in the newspapers. That the killer would write to police and patiently explain the extraordinary lengths he went to. That the killer would write to police and patiently explain the extraordinary lengths he went to allow him to overcome the conditions he faced on pitch dark Lake Herman Road is remarkable. And it once again demonstrates that the Zodiac somehow had exactly the type of weapon he would need ahead of time. Well, I mentioned this in a comment to a question on one of my videos. I will reiterate it here, is if you ever watch a James Bond movie, okay, and James Bond is being chased by bad guys along a beach, let's say, his car suddenly turns into a submarine and he gets away by, the car going underwater. If they're chasing James Bond like a flat expanse of land, his car suddenly turns into an airplane and it takes off. What you have in the case of the Zodiac killer, particularly in the canonical murders, is he always has exactly the weapon and the amount of lighting that he needs to commit the crime. At Lake Herman Road, he has a rifle that with a flashlight attached to it, which is perfect for the situation of having a victim running away from him. It is almost as if the killer knew that he was going to kill the male victim and then the female victim was going to try and run away. It is almost as if that crime was staged, okay? And they knew that they would have the victims abducted and they would shoot the male and then tell the female to run and shoot her in the back, okay? And having a gun with a flashlight attachment is the perfect weapon for that. On the other hand, when they approached Darlene Ferrin and Michael Magoo in the parking lot at Blue Rock Springs Park, the killer gets out of the car and he's got like a lantern light with his gun, and he brings the lantern light as if he is a policeman, walks around the car to the passenger side, and the lantern light is shining in their faces. They assume the guy is a policeman and they take out their ID, and by the time he gets to the car, he starts shooting at Darlene. All of a sudden they realize that he's not a cop, okay? But again, wouldn't you expect with a normal serial killer that he would have the same flashlight attachment that he had in Lake Herman Road? But he doesn't. He changes his lighting and he changes his weapon for the particular situation he's in. Again, we go forward to Lake Berryessa, okay? The killer arrived, well, very much like the Domingos Edwards killer, except he's much more organized. He arrives at the crime scene. He has them at gunpoint. He gets Cecilia Shepard to tie up Brian Hartnell. Then he very carefully ties up Cecilia. He checks Brian's bindings and notices that Brian is very loosely tied, and he actually scolds Cecilia for doing it this way, and he ties him up very tightly. And this is seen in the Fincher movie. What isn't seen in the Fincher movie is the dialogue between the killer and Brian Hartnell. It's almost like a normal conversation that two people might have. Two intelligent individuals might have on a park bench somewhere, except that in that particular case, the killer was holding them at gunpoint and then having them tied up and so forth. So again, and he already has the cut up lengths of hollow clothesline cord for which to tie the victims up in ahead of time. So, and when he goes after he has a double-bladed knife, doesn't let them know that they're about to be stabbed until they're helpless, and then he does it, and then he's got like a felt tip pen or a marker. When he goes up to where their car was, he knows which car is theirs. He goes to the passenger side door, and he's already got what we have to assume was a pre-planned message, okay, onto the car door, okay? When he's in Paul Stein's cab, he manages somehow, even though it would be certainly much more natural to shoot Paul Stein in the back of the head, instead, he gets up, I guess, gets forward in the front seat and grabs Paul Stein and shoots him above and in front of the right ear with a slight forward slant. Okay, then he gets into the front seat, cuts off the back of his shirt. I say that he also pulled Paul Stein's metal banded wristwatch off, and then put a Timex wristwatch on his not on more on his on Paul Stein's left forearm than on his wrist actually. Um, but the point to be made is that in all four of the canonical murders, the killer wasn't just ready to kill. I mean, he was prepared for the specific situation that was going to face him somehow. Okay, it is almost as if, besides being staged, besides each of the murders being effectively being staged and planned for, each of the murders, the killers thought about what might happen in the murders, and they prepared for that specific situation. Okay, so yeah, I think it is absolutely extraordinary that I can't think of another example of where a serial killer, and remember, Zodiac hobbyists love conventional serial killers. That's what they want the Zodiac killer to be. They want him to be a conventional, slobbering idiot who's running around, running amok on the landscape with an inch and a half of drool hanging out of his mouth. That's what they want. Okay, I can't offhand. I can't think. Having followed serial killers since the Son of Sam case. So, since before the Zodiac killer case, I was interested in serial killers before I happened upon the Zodiac case, and I'm really not a Zodiac buff. But in Ted Bundy, the same thing. But I can't think of a single example offhand. Maybe somebody can comment down below to this effect of a serial killer who successfully performs a murder and then completely abandons that modus operandi at his next scene, and then performs another successful murder, and then completely abandons that modus operandi, adopts the third modus operandi at his third crime scene. Okay, is successful again, manages to kill one of the victims, and gets all kinds of publicity. And so, I mean, if you're talking about if he wants publicity, yeah, he was getting lots and lots of that. Okay, and then in the cabbie murder, gets away from the scene as a complete success in terms of doing what he intended to do. Gets the swatches of shirt, mails them to the San Francisco Chronicle. Success. Okay, he keeps changing his modus operandi. I don't. Maybe you can come up with. I can point to differences in the MO of Ted Bundy. Okay, but they weren't the result of. They were generally the result of Ted adopting a different approach for a different situation going in. Okay, but they weren't similar to the Zodiac case, where each individual crime is a different modus operandi, and each time he kills somebody, it's as if he planned for that specific situation and brought a weapon that would bring that off, and created a situation which would allow him to have success. I don't know of a single conventional serial killer who did that. Again, maybe somebody can suggest that. Doesn't make any sense to me. Um, Again, unless you're trying to make a point with unless you're not really a serial killer, unless you're creating a collage of of serial murder cases, which draw on previous cases and draw on things like the Edwin Baird story. And so, as a result of that, you're creating. Sometimes you're copying the Moonlight Murders in Texarkana. For the first two canonical crimes. Sometimes you're copying Domingos Edwards. At Lake Berryessa. But that also has an aspect of the Moonlight Murders because he wore a mask. Sometimes you're just doing a conventional cabbie murder, in San Francisco. So I don't know how much more obvious it could be that the Zodiacs were creating this kind of collage of murder where they're taking a little bit of this crime and a little bit of this crime over here and maybe a theme from this, and sometimes they're doing it in their crime scenes. As I said, the Robert Salem murder is essentially a copy of the Gary Hinman murder. Okay, the Shelley Holmboe murder is essentially a pagan sacrifice murder. Um, I don't know how much more blatant that can be. I mean, I don't know of any actual serial killers other than the Zodiacs where they were all over the place and they were taking one from column A and one from column B and one from column C and constructing these little Chinese box puzzles each time. But apparently it makes sense to hobbyists on message boards. My voice isn't doing that bad when you consider the doctor was sticking. I've never. I think I will stop and tell you what happens when if you have spasmodic dysphonia. One of the options you have is to have Botox shot into the muscles of your throat, because what's happening is the muscles of your throat are constricting around where your vocal folds are. And what happens is one of the ways of fixing it is to usually for people who have like a really bad case of it. Although apparently my case isn't as bad as the guy who did Scott Adams, who's kind of a wacko, frankly, but he was in Mensa. Okay, so what can I say? But Scott Adams is the guy who did the Dilbert cartoon, and Scott and I have one similarity. Thank God, only one. We're only similar in one sense. We both have spasmodic dysphonia. Scott's is bad enough that he actually had to have surgery for it. Okay. I don't have to have surgery, but what happens is you go into the doctor's office every couple of months, in my case, and you sit in a chair, and you sit down in this chair, and then they stick electrodes on your body, and then the chair goes backward so that you're facing directly up. Okay, and then the doctor comes in, and they have to spray this freeze stuff so you don't feel it as much as you might otherwise feel. Okay, and then let's see how they do this side first. This is my right side. It looks like my left side there, but anyway, they stick a needle in this side, and they have to find your voice box. So, and they're looking, I guess, for the muscles around there, and it sounds horrible. They're basically shooting poison into you, but it's Botox. They shoot 2 mouse units into your muscles. It takes 100 mouse units to kill a mouse. Okay, so these are only 2 mouse units. Anyway, they move the needle around inside your throat until they find the spot. And yesterday, I'll tell you what, when she first stuck the needle in, it hurt like hell. And then I was making enough noise that she said, okay, we'll find another spot. And she pulled it out and she stuck it in a different place. So the thing that you have to do is just relax completely, like you're meditating, and just go into a trance. And so anyway, after moving the needle around, she finds the right spot, and she shoots the Botox in there, and then they go in the other side and find an find another spot in there, and move the needle around, find another spot, and stick, and then you're good. Um, as I said, what you have to do is you have to like completely relax to the extent possible. The first time they did it, the first time they do it, it's horrifying. After that, you're kind of ready for it. I consider myself very lucky. I have very minor issues. I have a little bit of arthritis that that just comes and goes, and it's been months since I've had any kind of significant issue with it. But I get it occasionally in my hands. One of my brothers has it in his hip, which would be a real problem, I think. And I have this. So I've been lucky. When you consider some of the horrifying things that other people get as they get older, so far I've been very lucky. I am not complaining. So, but anyway, let's move on, shall we? Okay. The bus bomb diagram. Okay, the bus bomb diagram letter, November 9th, 1969. 2. As of yet, I have left no fingerprints behind me, contrary to what the police say in my killings. I wear transparent fingertip guards. All it is 2 coats of airplane cement coated on my fingertips, quite unnoticeable and very effective. The killer did leave fingerprints on Paul Stine's cab and Paul Stine's blood. So contrary to what this letter says, he hadn't coated his fingertips with airplane cement. What this statement does reveal is that the Zodiac is aware of methods of avoiding detection by forensic units. It also reveals that he is intentionally not using them. In other words, as I suggested in Chapter 5, he left those fingerprints deliberately to allow the possibility of himself being linked to the crime eventually. Otherwise, in the absence of the Laytons and Paul Stine's wallet and bloody shirt, there would never be, and his taxi driver's badge, there would never be a way of proving someone guilty of the crime, even if he confessed. And a lot of people tend to confess to notorious crimes, as the Fincher movie parodies. Okay, Gary Post is another example of that. Another way of saying this is that the Zodiacs fully intended to leave a path to possible prosecution for themselves. The crimes were never intended to be perfect. If there were no fingerprints, no wallet, no bloody shirt, what incentive would anyone have to keep the case alive? You don't offer a puzzle to the public and then somehow suggest that that puzzle can never be solved. Like Jack the Ripper, for example. Leaving fingerprints also tells us that whoever the Zodiac was and is, he has never been booked. Since if he had been, the automated fingerprint identification system would likely have identified him by now. I kept up a correspondence with Ken Moses, who is one of the originators of the APHIS system, and it's pretty effective. I mean, it's got the problem with it originally was there was too localized to this jurisdiction or this part of the country, but as time goes on, it has become more and more. It's important to realize that one of my favorite TV shows is Law and Order, the original Law and Order with Jerry Orbach and um, who's the guy who played Ed Green? Anyway, and S.C. Pathamerkerson and all those people. Um, all that stuff about where they put somebody through the computer system, or NCS probably does this in every show. They enter some fingerprints and then press a button and immediately some guy's picture shows up. And that's this guy. We found a thumbprint. Well, they found the reason they caught the Night Stalker, Ramirez, is that he left a thumbprint on a rear view mirror in a car that he stole. Okay. And that's how and he almost ended up dying as a result of that because he was jumped by members of the public before the police could get to him. But he was identified by one single fingerprint. So, I mean, on the one hand, the system is very good. My hat's off to Ken Moses. On the other hand, it's not instantaneous either. I mean, generally speaking, it's a little bit like Dave Aranchek's process with Sam Blake's 650,000 permutations of Z340, which is that when each time they sent it through AZ Decrypt, they would each transposition through AZ Decrypt, they would get, I'm assuming, some sort of numerical value for this thing is like maybe 1% English, or this thing is 5% English, or this transposition is 15% English. Okay, so you start with the ones that are I don't know what the highest percentage would be, but let's say you start with one that says 20%. Let's say that's the highest value, and then you maybe work your way down from that. Looking at each specific result and seeing if there are English words, if the English words that they have absolutely jump out at you, and so on. So it's the same thing with fingerprints, where I believe what the APHIS system will actually do is give you 24 possible matches, let's say, and then a fingerprint expert will look, an FBI lab expert will look and say, okay, let's take a look at the entire prints for this guy because he's matching on the couple fingers we have, or he'll say, none of these are particularly close, or what have you. Because I'm assuming the computer system is going to be set up to give you results almost no matter what you feed into it. But I'm not familiar with that software. This is something Dave Aranchek could tell us about if he were available. Apparently he isn't. Anyway, the killer then describes a fertilizer bomb along the lines of the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. I suspect that though the threat of taking on a school bus was never serious, the killers did intend to use a bomb at some point, and the particulars cited in the letter are evidence of their familiarity with bomb making. Again, remember, this is November 9th, 1969. We're not talking about a world in which you have access to the internet and almost anyone can go online and find out about bomb making. In 1969, you couldn't do that. The logistical purpose of making the threat so specific is to keep the brand name, the Zodiac, in the papers and to intensify the efforts to identify him. The bomb description and bomb diagram are a means to an end, publicity. Okay, let me Dear Melvin, December 20th, 1969. The Wikipedia entry about the call to Oakland PD is wrong. The initial call actually came at 2 a.m. on October 22nd, 1969. The David Fincher movie Zodiac does a very good job of portraying Melvin Belli, who is played by Brian Cox as a pompous windbag. I talked to Belli once on the phone. It's an accurate portrayal. Who tries to talk the mental patient who calls the show into giving himself up. I believe that the call to Oakland PD was from the Zodiacs, among other reasons because the call came at 2 a.m., and the mental patient would not likely have had access to a telephone at that hour in the state mental hospitals of the late 1960s. The letter of December 20th, 1969 is mailed on the 1 year anniversary of the Lake Herman Road murders. The letter to Melvin Belli appears to authenticate the initial phone call. Additionally, as Zodiac researcher Ricardo Gomez has pointed out, there's an example of somebody who does. Nobody hates Ricardo. Okay, nobody hates. But I'm trying to remember. Michael Cole. Nobody hates Ricardo Gomez. Nobody hates Michael Cole. They should be congratulated for avoiding the kind of things that I have run into. I'm just I'm the sort of person that people whose guts people hate for some reason. I don't know why. Okay, the letter to appears. Okay. Additionally, as Zodiac researcher Ricardo Gomez has pointed out, the numerical address on the envelope exactly mimics the font of the digits on the wall of Melvin Belli's residence, which would suggest that the Zodiacs went out to Belli's house and looked at it and intentionally copied the way the house number was written. Again, remember, in 1969, December 20th, 1969, there is no such thing as Google Maps, okay? So to identify a house and to get out there and copy the font on a house number and to have that level of sophistication to be able to do that, okay, is something that would be, well, it would certainly indicate a very strong commitment to what you were doing, okay, that you're going out, and when you write Belli's address, and I don't think it was actually, I don't think the address itself was correct, but the font of the numbers on the envelope were identical. I would have to, let me see if I can. Good. I'm going to do what everybody who is ever not sure of himself about some detail of the Zodiac killer case does. I'm going to go to Tom Voigt's website. Okay. Okay, Belli letter envelope. There we are. I don't know if you can see that. You see the font of the 1228. I'm not sure that Melvin actually lived at 1228 Montgomery, by the way. But if you can see the font, okay, those numbers, the font is identical to what's on his house, is identical to what's on the envelope. And Ricardo Gomez pointed it out, and he is absolutely correct. Having said all that, it seems equally clear that the intent of the letter is to mock Belli's phony empathy on the Channel 7 program. Yeah, here's the thing. If you go to Dave Aranchek's, I think it's on episode 5 where he includes video from that program, and you can also, I think you can probably watch that entire well, not the entire program, but the parts of the program where the Zodiac or Eric Weil, okay, from whatever state mental hospital he was calling. If you go on, what you will notice is that Belli is just, I mean, he's a con man. Of course, I guess if you're a defense attorney or personal injury lawyer, that has to be part of your repertoire. But anyway, having said all that, it seems equally clear that the intent of the letter is to mock Belli's phony empathy on the Channel 7 program by making a direct confessional appeal to him as if the writer views Belli as an unasked for therapist. Actually, just to be let me see if I can get
at the end of the message, so it reads, let
me see if I can get.
It's because I knew the cipher was received on November 8, 1969, which is about 2 weeks after someone calling themselves Zodiac called into a TV talk show hosted by Jim Dunbar and featuring the famous lawyer Melvin Belli. While the show was on the air, the caller said, "I need help. I'm sick. I don't want to go to the gas chamber."
And then we'll come back and I'll give you a specific answer to this question when you're going to the gas chamber.
I want to kill those kids.
So all of this made the message seem real because it fits the timeline.
Okay, so basically, it seems equally clear that the intent of the letter is to mock Belli's phony empathy on the Channel 7 program by making a direct confessional appeal to him as if the writer views Belli as an unasked for therapist. The tone of the letter is nearly identical to that of a message left by the lipstick killer, allegedly William Hirons, on a wall at a crime scene. "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." The mimicry here is blatant and appears provoked by Belli's condescending tone on the TV show. "Dear Melvin, this is the Zodiac speaking. I wish you a happy Christmas. The one thing I ask of you is this: please help me. I cannot reach out for help because of this thing in me won't let me. I am finding it extremely difficult to hold it in check. I am afraid I will lose control again and take my ninth and possibly 10th victim. Please help me, I am drowning. At the moment, the children are safe from the bomb because it is so massive to dig in, and the trigger mech requires much work to get it adjusted just right. But if I hold back too long from number 9, I will lose all control of myself and set the bomb up. Please help me, I cannot remain in control for much longer." If the reader had any doubts as to the letter's lack of sincerity, the letters immediately before the bus bomb diagram letter of November 9th, 1969, and immediately after the 13-character cipher letter of April 20th, 1970, featured the usual menacing, mocking tone. Thus, the Dear Melvin letter is a departure intended to parody Belli's fake empathy with its own fake regret and remorse. The Zodiacs were saying, in effect, we're a lot smarter than you are, so trying to outsmart us is a waste of your time and ours. The Zodiacs were clearly also playing a game with the public perception of their invention, the Zodiac. That neither the police nor the newspapers recognized the sarcasm for what it was suggests that that game would continue unabated. The Mount Diablo letter. Let me just comment very quickly that the Zodiacs realized that Melvin Belli was kind of this windbag con man, and that they immediately after the Channel 7, well, no, not immediately after, because the two November letters followed it, but with the December letter that was mailed to Melvin Belli, essentially saying, trying to con us isn't going to work. Would seem to indicate that you're dealing with a higher level of intelligence than your average than your average serial killer. The Mount Diablo letter, June 26, 1970. The Mount Diablo letter of June 26, 1970 included a section of a Phillips 66 service station map with the peak of Mount Diablo circled as part of a clock face. I will discuss the significance of the map and code in Chapter 18. In the meantime, let's look at an unusual statement the writer makes. I shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38. As I've stressed, the Zodiac never claimed a crime that he didn't commit. So this means that he did kill a man sitting in a parked car with a .38. We know the Zodiac killed Paul Stine immediately after Stine put his cab in park. But SFPD has insisted that the killer used a 9mm in Presidio Heights. Has SFPD lied about anything else? Yes, we know that SFPD put out a version of Z408 that wasn't authentic. We also know that the San Francisco Chronicle said Paul Stine was shot with 38 in the original story on the murder, filed the day after it was committed. Then SFPD publicly changed the typing on the gun caliber. Here's the question. Why would the San Francisco Chronicle say that the crime was committed with a .38? For them to say that, SFPD must have originally told the beat reporter that the gun involved was a .38, because the reporter on the story would not just make up a gun caliber out of thin air. The police spokesman had to have said .38. If the Zodiac says he shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38, and the Zodiac never claims a crime that he didn't commit, then we have to assume that Paul Stine was shot with a .38 and that the Zodiacs are simply correcting the gun caliber, which would seem to suggest that that information, the actual gun caliber used, is significant on some level, okay? As I have demonstrated in another video, the gun numbers in sequence, 22, 9, 45, 38, convert using a backwards alphabet starting with Z equals 1, Y equals 2, X equals 3, to the sequence ERHO, which is Michael O'Hare's name spelled backwards, with the A removed. Why is the A removed? Because E and R added up, the 5th letter and the 18th letter give you 23. And H and O, the 8th letter and the 15th letter added together give you 23. So with the A, the central A removed from his name, Michael O'Hare's last name consists of two 23s. And the one of the main themes of the Zodiac Project is life is two 23s. Why? Because each human chromosome each human cell contains 46 chromosomes. 23 are donated by the mother, 23 are donated by the father. Therefore, all of human life can be presented by the idea of 23, or 2 times 23, or permutations of that idea. For example, the number 223, okay? That's what the point is in Dave Aranchek's deciphering of Z340, where they do not transpose the words life is or death. Life is comes at the end of the first half of the cipher. So life is two 23s. 23, 23. Michael O'Hare commits his first murder when he's 23 years old. Death is also 223. If you shoot people using a 223 rifle, using 223 ammunition, 223 is death, okay? Now, if you want to come back and say that, well, 23 and 23 or 2 times 23 isn't the same as February 23rd, or isn't the same as the number 223. Okay, but that's artistic license. Okay, and you see that all the time. You see it in rap songs. Okay, you see people playing with ideas that are not actually identical, but playing with the expression allows them to create an equation. For example, just off the top of my head, okay, in here in Pittsburgh, us Pittsburghers root for when we're watching hockey, we root for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Okay, in in 2016, the Penguins had a line which consisted of let's see, Hagelin, who is the trying to remember who the B was. Bonino, Hagelin, Bonino, and whoever the shooter was. Can't remember offhand. Who was the K? I don't know. I'll remember it in the best. Anyway, they had three guys on the scoring line, and their initials were HBK. Okay, and if you follow WWE, HBK is the Heartbreak Kid, who was Shawn Michaels. Okay, so what did the Penguins do? As they're having their playoff run, Phil Kessel I forgot his name. Okay, so it's Hagelin, Bonino, and Kessel. Okay, so it's HBK, and then they invited the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, to Pittsburgh to watch Game 5 of the conference championship. Why? Because he's the Heartbreak Kid. He's HBK. Okay, now those two things really don't have anything to do with one another, but it makes some kind of sense. Okay, so that was basically what the idea was is that the Zodiacs were using, and you see that all the time. Zodiacs were in, poetry. You see it in songs. You see it. What's the I've always thought one of the greatest songs from my parents' generation was that song "I'll Be Seeing You," where the lyric goes, "I'll be seeing you in every window that I go by. I'll be seeing you," and then at the end of the song, the lyric goes, I'll be looking at the stars, but I'll be seeing you. Okay, it's just they changed the emphasis of the statement, and I just thought it's a very clever lyric. But as I said, you see things like that in songs, in poetry, in puzzles. You see them. Okay, so it's the same idea. It's various usages of the idea of 2323, 223. I've shown you, I don't know how many times, Michael O'Hare's his here it is. This is a page. This is Michael O'Hare's maiden journal article, Progressive Architecture, March 1967, Wind Whistles Through MIT Tower. Wind whistles, W's the 23rd letter of the alphabet. The first thing out of Michael O'Hare's mouth in his maiden journal article is 223. It's WW, okay? And if you look at the Zodiac letters, they're talking about, I will cruise around the whole weekend, WW, okay? This again is another page from that same article. Creates an artificial angle with shadows at each end of 117 degrees, okay? And down here, what do we have? We have 223s. This is a blow up of the same thing. What I just showed you, it's a blow up. 23, 23. Somehow, Michael O'Hara managed to feature 223s right there in his initial journal article, and that would have been submitted right around the same time that Sherry Bates was murdered. Okay, so it's the same idea. Anyway, the little list letter. The letter quotes July 26, 1970. The letter quotes a patter song from the Mikado, which blatantly admits to. I am technically in transition here, so. The letter quotes a patter song from the Mikado, which blatantly admits to one of the central mechanisms of the Zodiac Project, that a list of possible victims was drawn up ahead of time, and then the actual victims were chosen according to their availability at the given time and place. So why didn't law enforcement and the public take this hint seriously? For several reasons. One, what the Zodiac said didn't make sense to them. Number two, they assumed he was one demented individual. Number three, they assumed his crimes were random. And number four, he presented the information in song form. Okay? Think about that for a moment. The Zodiacs actually sent a message explaining what they were doing to the newspapers. And no one took it seriously because there was something funny about it. Okay? Yeah, I mean, it's a song from a Gilbert and Sullivan comic opera, okay? Or operetta. To wit, it was from a comic opera, an operetta. Okay, I 8 years after the fact, I keep repeating myself. It's yet another example of the main tactic of the Zodiacs, misdirection. Not so much that the medium is the message, but the medium misdirects the message. Okay? The Mikado letter tells you what the Zodiacs were doing. Okay? I don't know how much more basic it gets than that. Okay? The reason people didn't recognize it is that it was presented in song form, okay? So they thought, hey, this guy's some kind of a Gilbert and Sullivan freak. You know, we'll set up we'll set up cops in the audience at the Mikado, and he'll probably like walk right into our arms, you know. That's not the idea. Just listen to the lyrics of the song. I have a little list of people who won't be missed, okay? And the Lord High Executioner sings the song. And the idea is, presumably, he's not going to kill all of those people, but some of those people are going to make their way in front of him and they're going to get executed, okay? So that's basically what the Zodiac Project was. It was people who were on a list making themselves available to the Zodiac killers, and apparently doing that in a way that at some, maybe for just like for a nanosecond, allowed themselves to become victims. Okay, and there had to be, as he says in the confession letter, she went very willingly. Apparently, all the victims had to go willingly on some level. Okay, and that was the idea. When they're telling you what they're doing, okay, and you're just ignoring it. I mean, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I mean, you reach a point where you ask yourself, should I go on? I mean, should I make another video? I mean, I'm just and the worst part of it is, you know, I mentioned Dave Aranchek a little while ago. I posted on Dave. Dave has this new video now where William Shatner mentions him. Okay, and I said in the comments section, I said, if you're a voice actor, you're just going to read whatever they put in front of you. You know, it's like, before I worked for the U.S. Postal Service, I was a professional typist, okay? In my heyday, I was one of the fastest. I was the fastest male typist that I had ever met. Every typist that I knew who was faster than I was was female, and she was like an executive secretary. Um, she was like a world class typist. Okay, I was fast enough that I could do closed captioning in real time. Okay, you have to be really fast to do that. You have no idea how fast people talk. Okay, um, people talk faster than you can type. Okay, but I was fast enough to be able to do that about as well as anybody else can do it. And the thing about being a world class typist is you aren't really a typist until you can type something without reading it. I would literally, when I was in Mensa, and I was an editor for two newsletters, and people would walk up to me and they'd say, "Oh, I see the new newsletters out. You know, what's new special interest group newsletters out? What's in it?" And I would say, "I don't know. I haven't read it." And they'd say, "Wait a minute, you're the editor of the newsletter." I said, "Yeah, but all I do is when people mail me, you know, whatever, a comment, or they send me an article or what have you, I just type it and put it into the and put it feed it into the newsletter, but I don't actually read it." Okay. And other than saying, "Okay, this is so and so," and they're writing in, because if you're an actual typist, what happens is the copy goes into your eyes and it comes out of your fingers. Okay. And for example, I have carpal tunnel syndrome because I worked for the U.S. Postal Service for 37 years. And if you're a typist, original typist, your home keys were ASDFJKLM. No, is that right? No, it's JKL semicolon. What is, yeah, JKL semi, AS, okay, ASDFGH JKL semicolon. Okay. I had to switch because of having carpal tunnel syndrome. I had to retrain myself to type on a Dvorak keyboard. And on a Dvorak keyboard, it's AOEUIDHTNS. They're all common letters. Okay. The letters on a standard keyboard, this is a magic keyboard, by the way, are not common. The common letters are kind of all over the place. The E's way up here. Where's the T? The T is up on the third row. I assume that was done. I'm pretty sure it was done on the original typewriters so that the keys wouldn't mesh, so that there was enough time in between people tapping on various keys that the keys weren't constantly meshing. The advantage of a Dvorak keyboard is that for every mile you go on a Dvorak, you would have gone 16 miles on a standard keyboard. Okay, so I had to teach myself. It took me 3 months of you understand why people who have to learn how to walk again become very frustrated, and it's because you're doing something that you never had to think about before, and then all of a sudden you have to think about it, and you know that you can do it, and yet you can't. You have to do it like one move at a time. So it's just the most frustrating thing in the world, but eventually I was able to convert myself on a Dvorak keyboard to where I was just about as fast as I was on the standard keyboard. But I thought that I would be able to switch back to a standard, and I couldn't. You know, you can't. You've rewired yourself so that, for example, it was comical. I would go into a library and they'd have a standard keyboard there, and I would literally have to look around for where the letters were. And this is somebody who could out-type anybody in the complex ordinarily, but now all of a sudden I don't know where the letters were, because now my fingers and my brain are wired differently. So I lost the ability to type on a standard, which is probably of all the athletic abilities that I had, that was probably number one. Although I was second board on the Taylor Alderdice chess team in 1967. They won the city championship, and I was undefeated, and I was the highest scorer. And I was the only non-senior on the team. Everybody else on the team, first, third, fourth, and fifth boards were all seniors, and the two alternates were seniors, and I was a sophomore. But and we only won the championship by half a point. Anyway, but I finished second in the junior championship in 1968 when I was a junior, and the guy who finished first is a grandmaster. Okay, so anyway, there's a guy named Aragon who also watches the Agadmator chess website, Agadmator. I go over there a lot. I'm not so interested in the game that I'm going to actually take up playing again, but I like watching games, and I find it entertaining. Anyway, trying to remember what. Okay. I mean, it should be pretty obvious. I mean, some of the things that the Zodiacs were doing, it seems to me, were obvious, and yet you just cannot break people of that predisposition to believe that since most serial killers are these, slobbering guys who go around and they're getting slobber on people, and they're expressing their basic urges, and they're doing all these like really basic things, that the Zodiac would be something other than that. And the question you have to ask yourself is, well, how is it that he managed to? I mean, Ted Bundy was a bright guy, and yet he managed to get caught. And part of the reason for that is that he was trolling for victims, and the Zodiac killer never trolled for victims. He just went directly to where the victim was. Boom, and nobody saw anybody trolling on Lake Herman Road. Okay, the first time the Zodiac killer was detected on Lake Herman Road was when James Owen drove by at 11:09 p.m. that night and saw the two cars in the turnout, and he heard a shot when he was about 30 seconds past that point. And then the next time somebody came by the point, the car was already gone. Okay, so anyway, the Halloween card. The first thing to note is that the card was addressed to Paul Avery. Besides being the crime beat reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle, Paul Avery was a licensed private investigator. Didn't know that, did you? In other words, Paul Avery was a private eye. Okay. So maybe it's significant that the Zodiacs added 13 eyes, one of which was peeking through a hole in a fence, to the original card. As Zodiac researcher Ricardo Gomez has pointed out, it's clear the Zodiacs went out to Melvin Belli's residence and copied the font as it appears on the front of his house, and then addressed the letter to Belli in that font. Okay, now you have an example of the Halloween card being mailed to Paul Avery with all these eyes printed in on the card, and Paul Avery was a licensed private investigator. I'm sure that came in handy for his newspaper work, and that probably made him like a very valuable commodity in the newspaper offices. But he was a private eye. In other words, the Zodiac had addressed two of their letters to specific people, Melvin Belli and Paul Avery, and they appeared to be familiar with personal information about both of those people. that they appeared to have done at least perfunctory research into offstage information about Melvin Belli and Paul Avery, and that they seemed intent on telling the world they were aware of the private lives of their letter recipients, which suggests they were engaged in a level of reconnaissance the public had no clue about. Yeah. And here's the other thing. um, if you have access to the state database, I've said this already, I'll say it again. If you have access to the state database, okay, you have a treasure trove of information, okay? If somebody cuts me off on the parkway here in Pittsburgh, okay, and I'm watching the guy and I take note as his car's flying by me, I take note of his license plate number, okay? I have access to the state database. I can find out who that guy is, okay? If I'm, you know, if I'm the road rage serial killer, I can then go out, find the guy. The easiest kind of, as the head of SFPD pointed out in during a press conference during the Zodiac period. The hardest crimes to solve are the ones that involve strangers. And having access to the state databases basically allows you to identify people. Not only that, but to figure out where people are. If I need to know where Mike Butterfield is, and I have access to the state database in Arizona, that may give me his address. I may go to his address and see that his car isn't parked out front, okay? But then I see his car someplace else. I figured that's where he is. And sooner or later, he's going to come back to his car, okay? And then he's going to have a lot of explaining to do. We're going to go over the Crackpot Files article point by point at that stage. But anyway, I have to have Steve Buscemi playing Mike Butterfield. I think he would do. He would win the Academy Award, I think. Now the only question at that point is, would Butterfield be sitting next to him at the Academy Awards, and would they walk up to the stage together? So, but anyway, the LA Times letter, March 13th, 1971. Instead of being sent to the San Francisco Chronicle, the LA Times letter was sent to the Los Angeles Times on March 13th, 1971. This is the Zodiac speaking. Like I have always said, I am crack proof. Like I have always said, I am crack proof. Note that the Zodiac says crack proof here, just as he does on the hole card. I do have to give them credit for stumbling across my Riverside activity, but they are only finding the easy ones. There are a hell of a lot more down there. By the way, one of the things that Gareth Penn pointed out, and I think is worth noting here, is that that Zodiac letter says there are a hell of a lot more down there. Okay, that's essentially a reference to Dante's Inferno, because you're talking about hell, and you're talking about down there, which is essentially, I believe, the Bible. And well, I'm not even going to bring that up. Somebody recently corrected me on a biblical reference. I don't want to invite that kind of question, but there are a hell of a lot more down there is, I believe, a reference to Dante's Inferno, where hell is down there. Okay, and Gareth points out that I think it's the Italian for hell actually, I think the Bible says a hole, and I think the Italian, there's some translation involving the words down there. The reason that I'm writing to the Times is this: they don't bury me on the back pages like some of the others. I suspect the real reason the Zodiacs wrote to the LA Times was that their admission to the Riverside murder would have more impact there than the San Francisco Bay Area, where consciousness of the Zodiac was much higher, but also relatively self-contained, particularly since the Zodiac was not known to have committed a murder for more than a year. So essentially, you write, if you're going to admit to the Riverside murder, you write to the LA Times, okay? It's closer to where Sherry Bates was murdered, and you're going to get more traction in the newspaper that way, presumably, okay? The Lake Tahoe card, March 22nd, 1971. Police in the Bay Area took the Lake Tahoe card as an indication of the involvement of the Zodiac in the Donna Lass abduction. Several police agencies were involved in trying to locate the punched hole in real space, thus making the assumption that Donna Lass was buried where the hole was. As I've mentioned already, Donna Lass's address was 3893 Pioneer Trail, but Pioneer Trail was also Lincoln Highway. The card was franked with a Lincoln stamp, the only such stamp the Zodiac ever used in the Bay Area. Again, this would seem to suggest the Zodiacs had done reconnaissance on the victim, the same sort of hint they'd sent with the letters to Melvin Belli and Paul Avery. Probably the best example of that is the Count Marco letter, July 9th, 1974. Editor, put Marco back in the hellhole from whence it came. Again, a reference to Dante's Inferno. He has a serious psychological disorder, always needs to feel superior. I suggest you refer him to a shrink. Meanwhile, cancel the Count Marco column. Since the Count can write anonymously, so can I. The Red Phantom read with rage. The return address of the Count Marco letter was RP, presumably for Red Phantom. Once again, the standard English in the letter tells us that the misspellings and bad grammar in earlier letters was simply misdirection on the part of the writers. If I call myself Red Ray Grant, read with rage, then I'm not really calling myself Red Ray Grant, right? Because I'm adding in the parentheses that red is a modifier. So I'm Ray Grant, and I'm red only because I'm red with rage. So since the Zodiac calls himself the Red Phantom, but then adds that he's red with rage, we can assume that he means to call himself the Phantom. The Phantom was a serial killer who terrorized Texarkana in 1946. The Phantom's murders are so similar to those of the Zodiacs, in some respects they're identical, that it's impossible to believe they weren't consciously copying him. It seems likely that the Phantom inspired the Zodiacs. Remember, I said the Robert Salem homicide was committed by consciously copying the Manson family murder of Gary Allen Hinman. And aspects of the Lake Berryessa murder are similar to the murders of Robert Dominguez and Linda Edwards in Santa Barbara in 1963. So the notion that the Zodiacs based their initial string of murders on those of an earlier serial killer should come as no surprise to us. Let's do a little thought experiment here and try to imagine what the motivation of the Zodiacs might be, working backwards. They set out to create a puzzle which would consist of public murders, followed by murders which were not recognized as their handiwork, and which they wouldn't acknowledge, at least not on the surface of their letters. If that's their intent, why would they copy someone else? Clearly, if you wanted publicity, you'd have the most control over the publicity aspect of what you did if you based it on something that had already happened, right? If you committed an original murder with no thematic overtones of anything earlier, you couldn't be sure what the reception to it would be. By patterning your work on that of some other serial killer, you would also be calling attention to your copying of the other case, particularly if you actually mentioned the earlier one. For the moment, let's just consider that the Zodiac Project used the Phantom of Texarkana, Texas, as its model for some of the actual murders of the Zodiac. What might have attracted them to that case? Their initial fascination appears to have been with the Phantom's tendency to attack on days that comprise a modern weekend: Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. All of the canonical Zodiac events, even the Sherry Bates murder, occurred on one of those days. The Phantom's first assault on Friday, Saturday, February 23rd, 1946, which is 2/23/46. Okay? Let's spell that out, shall we? Phantom's first murder, February 23rd, 1946, which is 2/23/46. 2 times 23 equals 46. There's no doubt he was copying the Phantom whatsoever. Okay? That's one of the reasons. As I said, the other reason is that the Phantom was committing his murders on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The Zodiac was only striking on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. The Dante is in the Dante's Inferno. He is in hell. He enters hell on Good Friday, comes up out of hell on Easter Sunday. So the trip through hell happens on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Okay. The Phantom's first assault on Friday, Saturday, 2/23/46, was in an apparent lover's lane similar to the attack at Lake Herman Road, except that the two victims survived. The couple arrived at the scene around 11:45 p.m. 10 minutes later, a man walked up to the driver's side door and shone a flashlight in the male's face, blinding him. That sure sounds like the Zodiac at Blue Rock Springs Park. The first two victims, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry, described him as being 6 feet tall with a white hood mask over his head, with holes cut for his eyes and mouth. That sure sounds like a primitive version of the costume at Lake Berryessa. The second attack occurred a month later on Saturday, March 23rd, 1946, again in a lover's lane, but this time the victims were discovered dead the next morning. Again, similar to Lake Herman Road, the two victims were apparently forced out of the car and killed 20 feet away with shots to the head, though their bodies were put back inside the car. The third pair of Lover's Lane victims was killed Sunday, April 14th, 1946, in a place called Spring Lake Park, which sounds like Blue Rock Springs Park. The man's body was found 1.5 miles from his car. The woman's was found 2 miles from the car, both in rural surroundings similar to Lake Berryessa. On Saturday, May 4th, 1946, an assailant attacked the farmhouse, shot a man to death, and wounded his wife with a .22 semi-automatic, not a .32 pistol as he had used previously. On Monday, May 6, 1946, a man was found stabbed to death on the railroad tracks north of Texarkana. His body was apparently dragged to where it was found. Like the Zodiac, the Phantom had broken his pattern. He similarly stopped killing and was never heard from again. Accepted relatives of the victims received phone calls in the years following the murders from someone claiming to be the daughter of the killer, apologizing for his deeds. It should be noted that a main suspect in the case had been jailed on unrelated charges in July 1946, remained in jail until 1974, and died in 1994. He had no daughter. I realize that at least one book has already compared the two cases. I think Steve Hodel did. But I'm not suggesting that the Phantom was the Zodiac. For one thing, the Phantom sexually assaulted his female victims and the Zodiac didn't. What I am suggesting is that the Zodiacs used the Phantom as their primary model and that they were pointing that out in the Count Marco letter in their last communication before the end. I need to point something else out that wasn't mentioned there. Let me go back to I just pointed out just a little while ago that Ricardo Gomez has pointed out that the Zodiac copied the font from Melvin Belli's house, the numbers on Melvin Belli's house, to onto the envelope that was mailed to Melvin's house. Although I don't think that's actually his address. Maybe it is. maybe they're both 1228. I'm not sure. Anyway, I've also pointed out that that the Zodiacs apparently knew that Paul Avery was a licensed private investigator, and that's why they put eyes. He was a private eye, and that's why they put eyes on the Halloween card. They added eyes to it. The Count Marco letter contains these horizontal lines at the end of horizontal dashes at the end of lines, and after editor, please put Marco back in the hellhole from whence it came. Dash. He has a serious psychological disorder. Dash. Since the Count can write anonymously, so can I. Dash. Okay. That's how Count Marco wrote in his private correspondence. Marco Spinelli, okay? I'm not sure. I don't think that would be something that would be copied in the newspapers. So whoever sent this letter was aware of the fact that Marco Spinelli had this habit when he wrote personal letters of including these horizontal dashes at the end of lines and sometimes in the middle of sentences. So it's another example. It's almost as if the Zodiac killers the Zodiacs are making the point that we aren't just contacting Melvin Belli and Paul Avery and Marco Spinelli as public figures. We have also done reconnaissance and we know personal things about them, okay? So that it isn't strictly a matter of like some kind of like public confrontation between the serial killer and the lawyer, the private injury lawyer, personal injury lawyer, or the journalist for the Chronicle, or the guy who writes a column for the Chronicle. They actually know personal things about those people. Okay, they have personal information about those people, so that okay, that's the end. In other words, the Zodiacs were doing reconnaissance. Okay, and if you're like you, Penn, and you're a statistician for the California Highway Patrol and then for the Department of Justice, you have as much information you have very valuable information about people, which is knowing where they live and knowing what in a lot of cases, knowing what cars they drive and what their license plate numbers are and so forth. And that allows you then to be able to locate people. It's kind of like a GPS system before GPS. Okay, we can locate people now. Police, when they're investigating, can sometimes locate perpetrators who were using their phones. Not only it used to be on Law and Order before you had the internet and before everybody had a supercomputer inside their in their pockets. They still were able um, to find out what communications that people had done by checking the LUDs on their phones, finding out who they called, who they talked to. They talk to a suspect and say you've claimed that you didn't know the victim, and yet you and the victim made phone calls to each other, throughout the previous week. And then it turns out that the suspect had some sort of connection with the victim that he wasn't willing to admit to. Okay, but with the GPS and with the modern cell phones, you can actually locate where a person is on the landscape, and or at least know that they were like this close to a cell phone tower when they made this call. Okay, so they had to be in this area, not in this other area. Okay, so that the Zodiac killers were either doing that kind of reconnaissance or they had access to that kind of information. Um, so that it's not as if the Zodiac killer was. One of the things this points out is it isn't as if it's not as if the Zodiac killer was preoccupied with necessarily with murdering people. The preoccupation was with the entire presentation of information, which included the murders, but also included the letters and aspects of their interaction with the public, with the police, with the newspapers. Okay, and they were putting just as much effort into those things, into reconnaissance, as they were doing with the actual murders. Okay, so I think that paints a picture of what we're dealing with, which is very different from what most Zodiac hobbyists are willing to admit to, which is that whoever was doing this, and I may end up doing like a separate video on Dave Aranchek now that he won't let me post on his video channel, or he erases my comments. But which is what is the sort of person that would use transposition? What sort of in a cipher? What sort of person? What sort of background would you need to have if you were doing that? If you were able to do that, as such that you were able to avoid detection for 51 years. Although again, I don't think it was the intent of UPenn to have Z340 go 51 years without being solved. It kind of loses. I mean, UPenn died in 1995, and Z340 was he died in June of 95, and Z340 was finally solved in December of 2020. So his best work, I guess, was solved more than 25 years after he passed away. So I mean, I think very much that they wanted and expected Z340 to be solved sooner than that. So anyway, let me see where we are here. Is that I can never read this. I think that's almost 1:45, something like that. So I've probably gone on long enough without trying to think of if there's something else about the. Let me take a. I will take a very quick look here at the the list of letters, and if anything absolutely jumps out at me. Some of the cryptographic, what I call baby block cryptography, I will address later on. I don't want to do that now because I want to deal more with the evidence than just covering this aspect of the puzzle. Let me see here. Confession letter. No, loose leaf letters. Well, they send a loose leaf letter to Joseph Bates to underscore the fact that both Joseph Bates and Sherry Josephine Bates both have the name Joseph Bates within their own names. Okay, remember, the Zodiac victims were chosen because of their names. Okay, that's the reason. And then once people with that particular whose names possessed a particular characteristic that they wanted to emphasize, it was just a matter of who was available when, and whether that victim made himself or herself available. There's if you go online and you watch the videos of Gerald Posner about the JFK assassination, which I recommend, and he talks about the fact that if Lee Harvey Oswald had, if the day of the JFK assassination, there had been like multiple co-workers up in the 6th floor of the depository, he probably would have just like kept his rifle in its package and gone back home with it Friday evening, and the assassination would never have happened. If the only reason Arthur Bremer was able to shoot George Wallace is that Wallace actually passed him in the reception line, and Wallace came back to pick up a baby or something like that, and that gave Bremer a second chance to shoot him, which he did. Okay, if Robert Kennedy hadn't gone out through the kitchen of the hotel, if he had gone out like the main entranceway, Sirhan could never have shot him. Well, he wouldn't have gotten close enough to do it. He got close enough because everybody assumed that Sirhan was just a restaurant help or what have you, and he was able to go up and shoot RFK. But as Gerald Posner has pointed out, there are probably more examples in history of assassins who put themselves in place to kill some leader and change history, who are not able to do that because the leader went some other way or never made himself available, and then they just had to drop their plan to kill that person. There are some assassinations. I think the assassination of John Lennon was virtually inevitable because John Lennon was making himself available to the public, and all you had to do was go to the Dakota in New York City and just wait around. Sooner or later, you were going to get a shot at him. But that certainly is not true of presidents of the United States. So that, as Gerald Posner has pointed out, there are probably many examples of would-be assassins who did not act because they were not given the opportunity to assassinate a leader. And I believe this is also true of the Zodiac killers, which is that the Zodiac victims were the victims who became available to them, who fit the what was required, whose names fit what was required, and to some extent probably their lifestyles or aspects of their identities fit what the Zodiac killers were looking for. Obviously, in the case of Shelley Holmbo, they were looking for a little girl. But it all came down to availability. It's what Ted Bundy said, frankly. I mean, Ted Bundy was once asked why he chose victims, specific victims, and he said it just came down to who was available. You know, he was he was trolling for victims, and certain victims made themselves available, and one victim, Carol Durant, managed to get away from him. So, but there were also victims, for example, at Lake Sammamish, the day that he killed two women who got as far as his car, saw that there was no sailboat there, and turned around and walked back to where they were. Okay, so sometimes it's just a matter of whether the victim makes himself available or not, and that's really what it's a matter of. It's a matter of availability. So anyway. Confession letter. Okay, yeah, I just talked about Joseph Bates. Z408 segments. I think I've talked about all of those. This is Zodiac speaking. It's unfortunate about the envelope to the Examiner letter, August 69. Again, I believe that it's an example of somehow the envelope got trashed in the mailroom, and then they just couldn't recover it for whatever reason, unfortunately. School bus threat and shirt. There were only 3 shirt swatches since the school bus threat letter of October 13th, the pen card of November 8th, 69, and I think it's going to say the Halloween card. I think the Halloween card to Paul Avery, and I think in that case they were just underscoring the fact that the card came from the Zodiac killer. I think I've covered those pretty well. Buzz bomb diagram, Dear Melvin plus shirt swatch. Second bomb diagram, Z13 letter, the dragon card. By the way, I think I make this point in my book. I went to Taylor Alderdice High School here in Pittsburgh. I still live in the same house that I lived in when I went to high school, and the school's only a few blocks from where I live, and the Taylor Alderdice High, the school teams are called the Dragons. So in the Dragon card, the guy. Let me see if I think I have a copy here. This is upside down. Sorry to hear your ass is a dragon. Okay, blast is from the Dragon card. I think I might have said it might be from the when I have my blast. Sorry to hear your ass is a dragon. I went to Taylor Alderdice, and the nickname of the school teams is the Dragons. So, on some level, my ass is a dragon. Whether I was ever associated with the Zodiac case or not. Okay, Dragon card. Just thought I'd point that out. C32, Phillips 66. I think I pointed everything out I need to about that one. Kidnapping confirmation. Little list letter. Radiant PS. Oh, the just to just to relieve the suspense here, okay? I realize that I'm sure Dave is still watching this video, so just to relieve the suspense. I know I don't want smokes to start coming out of his ears or anything. Z13, which was April 20th, 1970, and Z32, which is from June 26th, 1970. The thing I point out in my book is that those ciphers act more like diagrams than they do. I mean, waiting around, I just showed that in my last video that part of the point of Z32 is to demonstrate the positioning of the body of Joan Webster in Greater Boston, its relationship to the Boston Triangle, which consisted of the 3 points on a triangle where Joan Webster being at the Eastern Airlines terminal, the point where her purse was found in Saugus near Highway 107, and the point where I think that's at 20 degrees, the point where at 38 degrees, which is where the Greyhound bus terminal was, which is where a suitcase was found, and the Eastern Airlines terminal was at 122 degrees. 122 is Michael O'Hare's birthday. It's January 22nd. But the idea being that that the relationship of the omega character, the omega cipher symbol, to that hidden geometry in the letter was it was essentially a diagram for where Joan Webster's body was buried, which was at benchmark 12 in the Chinatown section of Boston. Okay, so so those two ciphers, as I said, Z13 and Z32, among other things. Now again, Z340, I've already pointed out, am I blue in the face yet? It's Me 37. It's the number of times the Zodiac struck. He struck 37 times, 20 times by gun, that's 20 rows of the Z340 cipher, and 17 times by knife, 17 columns. So it's a 20 by 17 grid. What Dave did with Z340 is very impressive cryptographically. However, it does not give us as much information as the grid format does, which basically tells us that the 4 canonical crimes were orchestrated ahead of time, and that they were set up to fire 10 shots, 9 shots, and then 1 shot. Okay, and at Lake Berryessa, 7 stab wounds and 10 stab wounds. Okay, that was all scripted in advance, and that gives us more information about the killers than I hope you're having fun. That wasn't me on the TV. I hope you're having fun trying to catch me, or whatever he says. Which doesn't tell us anything, except for, life is death. That part of it, okay? But anyway, the 2 short ciphers act more like diagrams, and I will demonstrate that in the future. They act more like diagrams than they do like ciphertext to plain text. Kidnapping confirmation. It's just acknowledging Kathleen Johns. She said she was abducted by the Zodiacs. The Zodiacs said that they abducted her. That's good enough for me. The little list letter I just talked about, the radian PS. I will demonstrate what inches along the radians means in a future video. The hole card, the punched hole, was believed by police to represent where Donna Lass was buried. Therefore, the police were essentially doing what I'm doing, which is that they were assuming we're at 2 hours. They're assuming that there was cryptographic material in the Zodiac letters apart from the ciphers themselves. Okay. Oh, that wouldn't have been the whole card. It would have been the Lake Tahoe card. Um, yeah, it would have been. I'm sorry, it would have been the Lake Tahoe card. But the whole card has the same wording as the L.A. Times letter. Crack proof. The Halloween card I've talked about. The two skeletons are um, Donna Lass on the cover. She's already buried by the time the card is sent, and Joan Webster inside is the skeleton inside the card that can still move around. L.A. Times letter sent probably because of the Sherry Bates murder acknowledges the Riverside connection. Lake Tahoe letter plus the hole punch. That's what the police agencies were convinced was indicated the burial position of Donna Lass. The Exorcist letter, Me 37, already talked about that. There's also, I think, a quote from the Mikado again. SLA letter. The SLA is yet another example of what they were doing with the Robert Salem murder, where it's that the Manson murders basically resulted in the Zodiacs not getting as much publicity as they might otherwise have gotten. Same thing with the SLA. Okay, so another example of their appearing to. I don't think they had any emotional reaction to it whatsoever, but of the killer appearing to have an emotional reaction to somebody else getting publicity and tremendous notoriety. The Badlands card again, perfect grammar, stuffy grammar almost. Basically demonstrates that the misspellings and the bad grammar of the earlier letters is just a ruse. And the Count Marco letter, as I said, whoever wrote the Count Marco letter knew how Marco Spinelli wrote his private correspondence. So I think that's going to do it. And I think we're over 2 hours now, just over 2 hours. So I hope this has been. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next because I think everything after this is. Let me take a quick look here. Well, I'll find out. It'll be probably I will just start the video rolling and see what's next and what I cover next in the book. But I think most of what I cover in the book most of the rest of the book I've covered, except for like some individual cryptographic stuff, which I will cover if I haven't covered them yet. So I want to thank everybody for watching my videos. If you watch all of my videos, thanks very much. I'm thinking that the more subscribers I get, the more the more my recognition level goes up on YouTube, and I am more likely then to get new people who are maybe sort of interested in the Zodiac killer, but are not set in their ways and haven't already decided what they think about the case. And if that's true, then maybe I can make a dent in some of those people. If I can get up to, what do I have now? I think I have, take a quick look here. 13 years old. Okay, and no one knew she was going to. I have 140 subscribers, which is, I think I've gained maybe 100 subscribers since I started the series. So I mean, if that keeps up, maybe I will reach a point where what's the term that they use for it? Uh, I'm thinking event horizon, but I think that's wrong. It's where you reach a certain number of people, and suddenly things start to move in that direction. Uh, what's the word for that? It's uh, can't remember offhand. This is what happens as your memory starts to go, and then everything else. Fortunately, I have a lot to lose, so I mean, I'm not losing. Maybe I'm not losing as much as your average person does. Critical mass is what I was going for. See, it's just on a delay. Everything that I'm reaching for now with my brain, it's just kind of like on a delay, and it eventually comes back to me like a boomerang. But critical mass, I think my hope is I will reach a certain critical mass with subscribers with a certain level of visibility on YouTube, where a lot of people who haven't already decided what they think about the case, but find my approach to the case interesting, and come aboard, and then the the interest in the case, and that might result in the case breaking at some point. I mean, if I got the level of publicity that Thomas Horan has gotten, where he's actually gotten, I don't know, was it Peacock did a series on. Of course, the other problem with that is that Mike Butterfield shows up on every single TV show about the Zodiac killer, so he'd probably show up on mine too. The big problem in doing that is that I'm naming names, and I'm naming people who are any network, or even if like the infographics channel on YouTube decided to do. I mean, they did a thing on Gary Post, I believe, but the difference was Gary Post was dead when they did it. Now, they might not be willing to do me for the same reason that a major publishing house probably would not be interested in doing a book about my view of the Zodiac case, for the simple reason that I'm naming names, and 2 of the 4 Zodiacs are still alive. Okay. And once they're dead, it's not going to do me any good if anybody comes forward, because at that point, we'll either know that they left information behind them or they didn't. And if they did, then it'll all come out in the wash. And if they didn't, maybe at some point, as I said, I'll reach a certain critical mass, and I will get a substantial number of people to see things the way I do. But I guess we're going to find out. Anyway, I want to let me see what it is now, just out of curiosity. Is that 2:00? Whoops. Is that? Yeah, it's a little bit after 2 hours. I just want to. My voice seems to be doing fine, so I want to thank anybody who has watched up to this point, and who has been watching my videos. Thanks very much. If you have any questions or comments, the last 2 or 3 videos that I've done, other than get like 1 or 2 heckles from people, if you're just going to comment to heckle me, don't waste your time, because I will just click on that remove button, like Dave Varanchek did with me today. Dave saw me commenting on his YouTube channel, and he immediately removed my comment. He left one of them up, but I made 2 other comments and he removed them. So I mean, if you're here to heckle me, you're just wasting your time. But if you have if you have questions, you have comments, I'm more than happy to field those and answer them. As best I can. So I mean, don't be shy about that. If there's anything I say that you don't understand, I will be more than happy to address any topic that actually pertains to what I'm talking about. There are other things about the Zodiac case that if you have a question about Arthur Lee Allen, don't ask me. He's eliminated by the fingerprints, is what I would say. Okay. So again, thanks very much if you've been watching. Thanks for watching my videos. I will, as soon as I can get the insertion point down there and find where the button is. Thanks again for watching. I will talk to you again soon.